The morning mist clung to the abandoned streets of Millbrook like a funeral shroud, and Marcus Thompson knew that today would determine whether humanity had a future or if they were witnessing its final chapter. From his position atop the water tower that served as their makeshift watchtower, he could see them, thousands of shuffling figures emerging from the tree line, their decomposing forms moving with an unnatural hunger that had consumed the world 6 months ago. The last safe haven, a fortified community college surrounded by hastily constructed barriers and razor wire, housed the remaining 43 survivors of what was once a thriving town of 12,000. Marcus adjusted his binoculars and felt his heart sink as he counted more infected pouring from the forest than they had ever faced before. The radio crackled to life in his hand as Riley Anderson's voice cut through the static from the communications center below. "Marcus, we've got movement on all sides, they're not just coming from the north anymore." Riley, a former Army sergeant whose tactical expertise had kept them alive through countless attacks, rarely showed concern in her voice, but today was different. Marcus could hear the underlying tension as she continued, "The eastern perimeter is showing signs of a massive horde, and our scouts report that the southern route we've been using for supply runs is completely overrun." Down in the main courtyard, 17-year-old Jake Morrison was helping Tommy Rodriguez, their chief engineer, reinforce the main gate with salvaged car parts and steel beams they had scavenged from the surrounding area. Jake had lost his entire family in the initial outbreak but had somehow managed to maintain an optimism that inspired the other survivors, even when their situation seemed hopeless. "Think these reinforcements will hold against whatever's coming?" Jake asked, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool morning air. Tommy, a burly man in his 40s who had worked construction before the world ended, shook his head grimly. "Kid, these barriers were designed to keep out desperate humans, not an army of the undead that doesn't feel pain or fear." In the makeshift medical center that Dr. Emma Williams had established in the former chemistry lab, she was treating Beth Carter, a middle school teacher who had sustained injuries during their last supply run when a group of infected had nearly overwhelmed their scavenging party. Emma had been working around the clock to keep the survivors healthy with limited medical supplies, and the stress was beginning to show in the dark circles under her eyes and the slight tremor in her hands. "We're running critically low on antibiotics and pain medication," Emma told Beth as she cleaned the wound on her arm. "If we don't find a way to resupply soon, even minor injuries could become fatal." Beth winced but managed a weak smile. "At least the kids are safe for now," she said, referring to the 7 children under her care who had been orphaned by the outbreak. In the communications room, 70-year-old David Palmer sat hunched over their ham radio equipment, desperately trying to reach other survivor settlements they had been in contact with over the past few weeks. David, a retired electronics engineer, had become their lifeline to the outside world, but for the past 3 days, all his attempts to establish contact had been met with silence. "Come in, Riverside Base, this is Millbrook Haven," he repeated into the microphone for the 100th time that morning. "We have an emergency situation and require immediate assistance." The silence that followed sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the morning cold. Lisa Brooks, their youngest adult survivor at 24, burst into the communications room with urgency written across her face. Lisa had been monitoring their security cameras and motion sensors since dawn, and what she had discovered made her stomach churn with fear. "David, you need to see this," she said, pulling up the footage on her laptop. "The infected aren't just wandering toward us randomly, they're being coordinated." The grainy black and white images showed groups of zombies moving in formation, changing direction in unison as if responding to some unseen command. "This isn't normal behavior," Lisa continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something or someone is directing them." As Marcus climbed down from the water tower to join the emergency meeting that Riley was calling in the main building, he couldn't shake the feeling that their 6 months of survival had been nothing more than borrowed time. The infected had found them, they were cut off from all outside help, and now they faced an enemy that seemed to be learning and adapting. The last safe haven was about to become a battleground, and 43 lives hung in the balance as the greatest fight for human survival was about to begin. The atmosphere in the main conference room was thick with tension as Riley spread a hand-drawn map of their compound across the scarred wooden table, her finger tracing the red marks that indicated breach points in their defenses. "We've got maybe 6 hours of ammunition left if we're conservative," she announced, her military training evident in the clipped precision of her words. "The last supply run netted us practically nothing. Most of the gun stores and police stations in a 50-mile radius have been picked clean." Marcus leaned over the map, studying the defensive positions they had marked in blue ink, each one representing weeks of backbreaking labor to fortify their sanctuary. "What about the explosive devices Tommy rigged around the perimeter?" he asked, though he could already see the answer in Riley's grim expression. 12 pipe bombs and maybe 20 Molotov cocktails," Tommy interjected from his position near the window, where he had been anxiously watching the approaching horde through binoculars. "Enough to slow them down, but not enough to stop what's coming." The room fell silent except for the distant moaning that seemed to grow louder with each passing minute, a sound that had haunted their nightmares for months. Dr. Emma Williams sat quietly in the corner, her medical bag clutched tightly in her lap, when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. "Where's Kevin?" she asked suddenly, referring to Kevin Walsh, an insurance salesman in his 30s who had joined their group 3 weeks ago after his previous settlement was overrun. The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud as the survivors looked around the room, realizing that one of their own was conspicuously absent from the emergency meeting. Lisa immediately pulled out her tablet and began scrolling through the security footage from the past hour, her fingers flying across the screen with practiced efficiency. "I've got him on camera 20 minutes ago," she said, her voice growing increasingly concerned. "He's in the supply room, and he's packing." The footage showed Kevin methodically stuffing a backpack with their precious medical supplies, food rations, and ammunition, his movements quick and furtive as he glanced repeatedly toward the door. "That son of a," Jake started to say, but Marcus held up a hand to silence him. "Tommy, get to the supply room now and secure whatever's left," Marcus ordered, his leadership instincts taking over despite the betrayal burning in his chest. "Riley, how much damage has he done to our supplies?" As Tommy rushed from the room, the sound of his heavy boots echoing down the hallway, David Palmer's radio suddenly crackled to life with a transmission that made everyone freeze. "Millbrook Haven, this is Falcon 7 Alpha," came a professional military voice through the static. "We have your location and are currently engaged with hostile forces approximately 15 miles from your position. Maintain your current position and prepare for possible evacuation." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving them with more questions than answers, but before anyone could respond, the building shook slightly as the first explosion echoed across the compound. "They've hit the outer trip wires," Riley announced, checking her watch with the precision of a seasoned soldier. "That means they're less than 200 yards from our main perimeter." Through the windows, they could see the first wave of infected stumbling through the gaps in their makeshift fence, their decomposing forms silhouetted against the morning sky like nightmare shadows come to life. Beth Carter appeared in the doorway, her face pale with fear as she clutched the hand of 7-year-old Annie Martinez, one of the children under her protection. "The kids are asking what's happening," Beth said, her voice barely steady. "What do I tell them?" Emma stood up, her medical training overriding her personal fear as she moved toward Beth and the child. "Tell them we're going to keep them safe," she said with more confidence than she felt. "No matter what happens." Meanwhile, Tommy's voice boomed from down the hallway as he discovered the extent of Kevin's theft. "Half our medical supplies are gone, and he took the spare radio batteries," he shouted, his anger echoing off the walls. "The coward left us high and dry." Marcus felt the weight of leadership pressing down on his shoulders as he realized they were facing an impossible decision. The approaching horde was larger than anything they had encountered before, their ammunition was critically low, and now they had been betrayed by one of their own. "We have 2 choices," he announced to the group, his voice cutting through the chaos of voices and distant gunfire. "We can make our stand here with what we have left, or we attempt to break through their lines and try to reach that military unit before they're overrun." Riley was already checking her weapons, her soldier's instincts taking over as she prepared for battle. "If we stay, we might last until help arrives, but if that military unit is destroyed, we're dead anyway," she said pragmatically. If we run, we're exposing the children and the injured to direct combat, but we might have a chance at real rescue. The sound of automatic gunfire suddenly erupted from their outer defenses as their sentries engaged the first infected to breach the perimeter, and Marcus knew their time for debate had just run out. Whatever decision they made in the next few minutes would determine whether any of them would live to see another sunrise, and the weight of 42 lives rested squarely on his shoulders as the battle for humanity's last safe haven began in earnest. The decision to fight was made for them as the compound's alarm system blared to life, signaling that the infected had breached their first line of defense. Marcus grabbed his rifle and rushed to the main observation window, where he could see Tommy's improvised explosive devices detonating in brilliant flashes along the perimeter, sending limbs and debris flying in all directions as the first wave of zombies stumbled into their carefully planned kill zones. "It's working!" Jake shouted from his position at the eastern window, his youthful enthusiasm barely contained as he watched the explosions tear through the advancing infected. "They're walking right into the traps." Riley had taken position on the roof with her sniper rifle, methodically picking off any infected that managed to avoid the explosions, her military precision evident in each carefully aimed shot that dropped the creatures before they could reach the inner fence. From her elevated position, she could see the tactical advantage they had gained by forcing the zombies to funnel through specific choke points, but something about their behavior was bothering her in ways she couldn't quite articulate. The infected were moving more slowly than usual, almost hesitantly, as if they were testing the defenses rather than launching an all-out assault. Down in the courtyard, Dr. Emma Williams and Beth Carter were helping to coordinate the defense from the medical station they had established in the main building, treating minor injuries from flying debris and keeping the children calm while the adults fought for their lives. 7-year-old Annie Martinez clung to Beth's sleeve, her eyes wide with terror as the sounds of gunfire and explosions echoed through the building. "Miss Beth, are the monsters going to get us?" Annie whispered, her small voice barely audible above the chaos. Beth knelt down to the child's level, forcing a reassuring smile despite her own fear. "The grown-ups are very good at keeping monsters away," she said gently. "You just stay close to me and everything will be okay." Meanwhile, David Palmer had managed to re-establish contact with the military unit, his hands shaking with excitement as the voice of Falcon 7 Alpha came through the radio static. "Millbrook Haven, we're fighting through heavy resistance but making progress toward your location," the military operator reported. "Estimate our arrival in 4 to 6 hours, depending on hostile activity. Can you maintain your position?" David keyed the microphone with trembling fingers. "We're under attack but holding our ground," he replied, trying to keep the desperation out of his voice. "Casualties are minimal so far, but we're running low on ammunition." As the afternoon wore on, the survivors began to feel a cautious optimism as they successfully repelled wave after wave of infected using Tommy's explosive devices and carefully coordinated gunfire. Lisa monitored the security cameras from her position in the communications room, calling out enemy movements and coordinating defensive positions with military-like efficiency. "Infected group approaching from the northwest, approximately 20 hostiles," she announced over their internal radio system. "Tommy, you've got Molotov cocktails in position 3? Tommy's voice crackled back through the radio as he prepared to launch another homemade explosive. "Ready when you are, Lisa. These bastards are about to get a warm reception." The explosion lit up the afternoon sky as the fuel mixture ignited, creating a wall of fire that stopped the approaching infected in their tracks and sent several of them stumbling away in flames. But as the sun began to set and darkness crept across the compound, Riley noticed something that made her stomach drop with dread. From her elevated position, she could see movement in the forest beyond their perimeter, massive movement that dwarfed everything they had faced during the day. "Marcus, you need to get up here right now," she called down urgently, her voice carrying a tone that made everyone in the compound stop what they were doing. When Marcus reached the roof and looked through Riley's binoculars, he felt his blood turn to ice. Thousands of infected were emerging from the tree line in a coordinated mass that stretched as far as he could see in either direction, their movements synchronized in a way that defied everything they thought they knew about zombie behavior. "The ones we fought today were just scouts," Riley said grimly, lowering her rifle as she realized the magnitude of what they were facing. This is the real attack. The realization hit the compound like a physical blow as word spread that their successful defense had been nothing more than a preliminary test, a way for whatever was controlling the infected to probe their defenses and identify their weak points. As darkness fell and the massive horde began its approach, Marcus made the devastating decision to abandon their outer defensive positions and retreat to the inner buildings, but the speed of the assault caught several survivors off guard. Tommy found himself trapped in the workshop when the infected overran the courtyard faster than anyone had anticipated, while two of their sentries, Patricia Mills and Robert Chen, were cut off in the generator building as zombies swarmed the area. From the main building, the survivors could hear Tommy's voice over the radio as he barricaded himself in his workshop with whatever tools and materials he could find. "I'm secure for now, but there's no way I can make it back to you guys," he reported, his voice steady despite the dire circumstances. "Just worry about keeping the kids safe, I'll figure something out." As the real battle began and the compound was overrun by hundreds of infected, Marcus realized that their fight for survival had only just begun, and the darkness that surrounded them seemed to echo with the hungry moans of an enemy that was far more intelligent and organized than they had ever imagined. The sound of Tommy's voice crackling through the radio in desperate bursts drove Riley to make a decision that went against every tactical instinct she had developed during her military service. "I'm going after them," she announced to Marcus, checking her ammunition and strapping on the tactical vest that had saved her life countless times before. "Tommy, Patricia, and Robert are still alive, and I'm not leaving anyone behind." Jake immediately stepped forward, his young face set with determination that reminded Marcus of soldiers he had seen in war documentaries. "I'm going with her," Jake declared, ignoring the protests from the other adults. "I know every shortcut and hiding spot in this compound better than anyone, and Tommy saved my life during the last supply run." Marcus wanted to refuse, knowing that sending their best fighter and their most agile scout into the zombie-infested compound was tactically unsound, but the desperate situation called for desperate measures. "Take Lisa with you for communication support," Marcus decided, "and you have exactly 30 minutes before we have to seal the building completely." As Riley, Jake, and Lisa prepared for their rescue mission, Dr. Emma Williams made a discovery that sent chills down her spine while treating a minor injury that David Palmer had sustained from flying glass. Under the bright LED examination light, she noticed something unusual about the blood sample she had taken. The infection showed signs of partial resistance, as if David's immune system was fighting back against the zombie virus in ways she had never seen before. "David, have you been feeling any different lately?" Emma asked carefully, not wanting to alarm the elderly man. "Any unusual symptoms, changes in appetite, or strange thoughts?" David looked puzzled but answered honestly. "Well, I have been having the strangest dreams lately, almost like I can hear voices calling to me from outside, but I assumed it was just stress from our situation." Meanwhile, Riley's team had managed to reach the workshop where Tommy was trapped by using the maintenance tunnels that ran beneath the compound, a route that Jake had discovered during one of his exploratory missions weeks earlier. Through the workshop's reinforced windows, they could see Tommy had barricaded himself behind a wall of metal shelving and was using his welding torch to keep the infected at bay, but his fuel was running dangerously low. "Tommy, we're in the tunnel directly below you," Riley whispered into her radio. "Is there any way you can access the floor hatch without compromising your position?" Tommy's response came through labored breathing as he fought off another wave of infected trying to break through his barricade. "The hatch is blocked by one of my work tables, but I think I can move it if you can create a distraction from your end." Lisa had brought along several of Tommy's remaining pipe bombs, and she carefully placed them in strategic positions throughout the tunnel system that would force the infected to retreat from the workshop area. "On my mark, Tommy," Riley instructed, "you'll have maybe 60 seconds to reach the hatch before they regroup." The explosions that followed shook the entire compound and successfully drew most of the infected away from Tommy's position, allowing him to escape through the floor hatch just as his welding fuel ran out completely. But as they made their way toward the generator building where Patricia and Robert were trapped, Lisa's monitoring equipment picked up something that made her blood freeze. The infected weren't just randomly wandering around the compound anymore. "They're moving in formation," Lisa whispered urgently to Riley. "Look at your 2 o'clock, that group of 12 zombies just changed direction simultaneously when we moved, and there's no way they could have seen or heard us from that distance." Riley followed Lisa's gaze and realized that the teenager was absolutely right. The infected were responding to some form of coordination that went beyond their usual mindless hunger. Through her binoculars, she spotted something that made her stomach turn. Among the shuffling masses of decomposing bodies, there was one figure that moved differently, with purpose and intelligence that was distinctly human. The creature was wearing the tattered remains of a business suit and still retained enough of its original appearance to be recognizable as having once been human, but its eyes glowed with an unnatural intelligence as it gestured to groups of infected, directing their movements like a general commanding troops. "There's something controlling them," Riley reported to Marcus over the radio. "One of the infected retained its cognitive abilities somehow, and it's using the others like chess pieces." The rescue team successfully reached Patricia and Robert, who had been trapped in the generator room and were running out of ammunition fast, but as they began their retreat back to the main building, the intelligent zombie seemed to anticipate their movements and directed a massive wave of infected toward the generator building. In the chaos that followed, Robert Chen made the split-second decision to remain behind and manually overload the main generator, knowing that the resulting explosion would eliminate dozens of infected but would also destroy their primary power source. "Tell my wife I love her," Robert said into his radio as he began the overload sequence, his voice calm despite the approaching horde. "And make sure those kids get somewhere safe." The explosion that followed lit up the night sky and created a gap in the infected ranks that allowed the rescue team to escape, but as they reached the safety of the main building, Marcus realized that they were now operating in complete darkness with no hope of restoring power, while facing an enemy that could think, plan, and adapt to their defensive strategies. The darkness that enveloped the compound after Robert's sacrifice was more than just the absence of light. It was a suffocating blanket that seemed to amplify every sound and transform familiar corridors into alien landscapes filled with unknown threats. Marcus gathered the remaining survivors in the main conference room, using battery-powered LED lanterns to create a small circle of illumination that felt like the last beacon of hope in a world consumed by shadows. "We've got maybe 8 hours of battery power left across all our devices," Lisa reported, her tablet screen casting an eerie blue glow on her face as she calculated their remaining resources. "After that, we're operating completely blind." Riley had positioned herself near the barricaded windows, her rifle ready as she listened to the sounds of infected moving through the darkened compound below, their moaning creating an unsettling symphony that seemed to come from every direction at once. The intelligent zombie had withdrawn its forces after Robert's explosion, but she could sense them out there, waiting and planning their next move with a patience that was distinctly human. "There's a backup generator in the basement level," Tommy announced, his voice hoarse from the smoke he had inhaled during the rescue. "It's an old diesel unit that should have enough fuel to run essential systems for maybe 12 hours, but getting to it means going through 3 levels of corridor that could be crawling with infected." Dr. Emma Williams sat in the corner with David Palmer, carefully examining blood samples under a portable microscope that ran on battery power, when she made a discovery that sent shock waves through her understanding of the infection. "David, I need you to look at this," she said urgently, adjusting the microscope's focus. "Your blood shows signs of immunity development, not complete immunity, but your white blood cells are actively fighting the infection in ways I've never seen before." David peered through the microscope with trembling hands, seeing his own blood cells engaged in what looked like microscopic warfare against the zombie virus. "What does this mean?" he asked, though part of him already suspected the answer would change everything they thought they knew about their situation. Emma's voice was barely above a whisper as she explained her findings. "It means the infection isn't permanent for everyone, and there might be a way to develop natural resistance, but more importantly, it explains why you've been having those dreams about hearing voices. You're partially connecting to their hive mind without being fully converted." The implications of Emma's discovery hit the group like a physical blow, but before anyone could fully process what this meant for their survival, Marcus made the difficult decision to split their remaining forces. "Riley, take Jake and Tommy down to the basement level and see if you can get that backup generator online," he ordered, knowing he was potentially sending his best people into a death trap. The rest of US will hold this position and try to maintain contact with that military unit. Beth Carter gathered the 7 children around her in the safest corner of the room, using a battery-powered tablet to show them quiet games and videos that would keep them distracted from the horror surrounding them. 9-year-old Michael Torres, the oldest of the children, seemed to understand the gravity of their situation better than the others and had taken on the role of helping to keep the younger kids calm. "Miss Beth, are we going to be okay?" Michael whispered, his mature eyes reflecting fears that no child should have to carry. "The grown-ups are doing everything they can," Beth replied honestly, knowing that false promises would only make things worse when reality inevitably intruded. As Riley's team prepared to descend into the darkened basement levels, David Palmer managed to establish another brief contact with Falcon 7 Alpha, but the transmission was filled with static and desperate urgency. "Millbrook Haven, this is Falcon 7 Alpha," came the strained voice through the radio interference. "We're taking heavy casualties and have encountered infected that are displaying coordinated behavior. Repeat, the hostiles are working together with apparent intelligence." David's hands shook as he keyed the microphone. "Falcon 7 Alpha, we've made the same observation. There appears to be a controlling entity directing the infected masses. We also have a potential survivor who shows signs of natural resistance to the infection." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving them with nothing but static and the distant sound of what might have been explosions or gunfire from the direction where the military unit was supposed to be approaching. Riley's team descended into the basement using emergency lighting and tactical flashlights, their beams cutting through the darkness like swords as they navigated corridors that had become alien and threatening without the familiar comfort of overhead lighting. The backup generator room was located in the deepest part of the basement, past the old bomb shelter that the college had built during the Cold War, and every step they took echoed ominously in the concrete corridors. "Movement ahead," Jake whispered, pointing his flashlight toward a junction where several infected had apparently taken shelter from the explosions above. The zombies turned toward their light with the slow, mechanical movements that had haunted their nightmares, but something about their behavior seemed different, more purposeful, as if they were guarding something rather than simply wandering aimlessly. As Riley prepared to engage the infected blocking their path to the generator room, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into another carefully orchestrated trap, and that the intelligent zombie above ground was using the darkness to its advantage in ways they couldn't even begin to imagine. The infected in the basement corridor moved with an eerie coordination that confirmed Riley's worst fears about the intelligent zombies' growing control over the Horde, but as her team engaged them in close-quarters combat, the sound of their gunfire echoed through the concrete passages and seemed to draw more infected from deeper within the building's lower levels. Tommy had just managed to reach the backup generator when the basement was suddenly flooded with dozens of zombies pouring down the stairwells from multiple directions, their decomposing forms moving with purpose as they systematically cut off every escape route that Riley's team had planned. "The generator's functional, but I need at least 10 minutes to get it online." Tommy shouted over the sound of gunfire as he worked frantically with the diesel engine's manual startup sequence, his hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the chaos erupting around him. Riley and Jake formed a defensive perimeter around the generator room, but their ammunition was dwindling rapidly as wave after wave of infected pressed their attack with relentless determination. From upstairs, the survivors in the main conference room began hearing something that chilled them to the bone, voices calling out from the darkened compound, voices that sounded exactly like their loved ones who had died in the initial outbreak months ago. "Marcus, please help me," came a voice that sounded exactly like his deceased wife Jennifer, the tone and inflection so perfect that for a moment he forgot she had been killed in the first days of the infection. "I'm trapped outside and I can't find my way back to you." Beth Carter felt her heart stop as she heard the voice of her husband Paul calling from somewhere in the darkness beyond the barricaded windows, his voice carrying the same gentle tone he had used when reading bedtime stories to their own children before the world ended. "Beth, honey, why won't you come outside? The kids are scared and they need their teacher." Dr. Emma Williams recognized the psychological warfare immediately, understanding that the intelligent zombie had somehow accessed the memories of the infected and was using them to break down the survivors' mental defenses, but even knowing it was a trap didn't make the voices any less devastating to hear. "It's not real," she announced firmly to the group, though her own voice wavered as she heard her colleague Dr. Martinez calling her name from the compound. "The controlling entity is using their memories against us." David Palmer's radio suddenly crackled to life with a transmission that made everyone in the room freeze with terror. It was his own voice, speaking in the exact tone and cadence he used when operating the radio, but the words coming through the speaker were not his own. "This is David Palmer calling any survivor settlements in the area," his own voice said through the radio. "Millbrook Haven has fallen and we're all dead. Don't send help, it's too late for all of us." Lisa immediately grabbed her tablet and began frantically trying to override their radio frequency, her fingers flying across the screen as she realized the intelligent zombie was not only mimicking voices but was actively trying to prevent rescue by impersonating their radio operator. "It's broadcasting on our frequency," she said in panic. "If the military unit receives that transmission, they'll think we're already dead and might not risk coming for us." Meanwhile, in the basement, Tommy had managed to get the backup generator started, but the noise of the diesel engine attracted every infected in the lower levels, and they came pouring into the generator room like a decomposing tide. "I've got power to the building, but I can't leave this position or the generator will shut down automatically," Tommy yelled to Riley, who was running dangerously low on ammunition as she tried to hold the doorway. The lights flickering on throughout the compound provided momentary relief, but also revealed the true scope of their desperate situation. Hundreds of infected had infiltrated the building during the darkness, and they were now trapped on multiple levels with nowhere to retreat. Tommy made a decision that would haunt the survivors forever as he realized that someone needed to manually maintain the generator while the others escaped, and he was the only one with the technical knowledge to keep it running under combat conditions. "Riley, get out of here now," he shouted, firing his last rounds at the approaching infected. "Take Jake and get back upstairs, I'll hold this position as long as possible." As Riley and Jake fought their way back toward the stairwell, Lisa made a crucial discovery while studying the building's original blueprints on her tablet. The old storm drain system that ran beneath the compound connected to a network of tunnels that emerged nearly a mile away from their current position. "I found us a way out," she announced urgently to Marcus and the others. The storm drains were built in the 1960s and they're large enough for people to crawl through, but we'd have to access them from the basement level. The sound of Tommy's final stand echoed through the building as he used his welding equipment and remaining explosive materials to create a barrier that would buy the others precious time, his voice coming through the radio one last time with words that would be remembered by every survivor who made it through the night. "Tell my sister in California that I kept my promise to keep fighting." Tommy's voice crackled through the static, followed by an explosion that shook the entire building and plunged them back into darkness as the generator was destroyed, but not before Lisa had pinpointed their escape route through the treacherous storm drain system that represented their last hope for survival. The storm drain entrance was a rusted metal grate hidden beneath decades of debris in the basement's utility room, and as Marcus pried it open with a crowbar, the stale air that rushed out carried the promise of freedom tinged with the unknown dangers that lurked in the underground passages. Riley had returned from the generator room with Jake, both of them covered in zombie blood and carrying the devastating news of Tommy's heroic sacrifice, but there was no time to mourn as the infected continued to pour into the building from every direction. The drain system runs east for about 800 yards before it connects to the main city storm system, Lisa explained, her tablet's GPS showing their route through the underground maze. "From there, we can surface near the old railroad bridge, but we'll be crawling through tight spaces for at least an hour." Dr. Emma Williams helped David Palmer into the drain first, knowing that his potential immunity might be crucial for their survival, while Beth Carter organized the children into a line with the older kids helping the younger ones prepare for what would be the most terrifying journey of their young lives. 9-year-old Michael Torres stepped forward with a maturity that broke the adults' hearts, taking 7-year-old Annie Martinez by the hand and whispering reassuring words that he didn't believe himself. "We're going on an adventure underground," Michael told Annie, his voice steady despite the terror in his eyes. "Like explorers in a cave, and we'll all stay together no matter what happens." As the survivors began their desperate crawl through the narrow storm drain system, using their remaining flashlights to navigate the concrete passages, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that their escape was proceeding too smoothly. the infected had made no attempt to follow them into the drains, and the underground passages were eerily quiet compared to the chaos they had left behind. "Something's wrong," Riley whispered to Marcus as they crawled through a section of pipe that was barely wide enough for their shoulders. "They could have followed us down here, but they're not even trying. It's like they want us to use this route." Lisa, who was monitoring their progress on her tablet from the middle of the group, suddenly stopped crawling and held up her hand for silence as her GPS showed something that made her blood freeze. "We're not heading toward the railroad bridge anymore," she whispered urgently. "The passage we're following connects to the old subway tunnel system, and according to these blueprints, there's only one way out from where we're heading." The realization that they were being herded into a trap hit the group like a physical blow, but before anyone could suggest turning back, the sound of infected voices began echoing through the storm drain system behind them, not the mindless moaning they were accustomed to, but actual words spoken in the voices of people they had known and loved. "Marcus, why are you running from us?" came Jennifer's voice again, this time accompanied by the sound of dragging footsteps through the drainage pipes. "We just want to be together again, like we used to be." Beth Carter nearly broke down completely when she heard the voices of her own children calling her name from the darkness behind them, their innocent voices pleading for their teacher to come back and help them with their homework, but Emma grabbed her arm and forced her to keep moving forward. "It's not them," Emma whispered fiercely to Beth. "Whatever that thing is, it's using their memories to break us down, but we can't let it win." As they reached the junction where the storm drain connected to the abandoned subway tunnel, Marcus realized they had no choice but to enter the larger underground space, where ancient subway cars sat rusting on tracks that hadn't been used in decades, creating a maze of hiding places and potential ambush points. The tunnel was vast compared to the cramped drain pipes, but the darkness seemed to press down on them with malevolent intelligence as their flashlight beams revealed graffiti-covered walls and debris scattered across the old platform. There, Jake pointed to the far end of the tunnel where a maintenance ladder led up to a street-level access point, but between them and freedom lay nearly 200 yards of open ground that offered no cover from whatever was hunting them in the darkness. Riley took point position with her rifle, knowing that their ammunition was nearly exhausted but determined to protect the group as they made their final desperate dash for the surface, when suddenly the tunnel was filled with movement as dozens of infected emerged from behind the rusted subway cars. But these weren't ordinary zombies. They moved with purpose and coordination, forming ranks like soldiers as they blocked every escape route except the path that led deeper into the tunnel system toward what looked like an abandoned subway platform. At the center of the infected formation stood the intelligent zombie that had been orchestrating their torment, its business suit now torn and bloody but its eyes burning with an unnatural intelligence that seemed to peer directly into Marcus's soul. "You've been very entertaining," the creature spoke in a voice that was disturbingly human despite the decay visible in its features. "But this game ends now, and you'll join us in our new world order whether you choose to or not." Marcus stepped forward, positioning himself between the intelligent zombie and the survivors behind him, while David Palmer suddenly staggered and placed his hand on Marcus's shoulder with a strength that surprised everyone. "I can feel its thoughts," David whispered urgently, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and understanding. "The infection is trying to connect with me, but I'm fighting it. I can sense its plans and maybe even disrupt its control over the others." As the final confrontation began in the abandoned subway tunnel, with Marcus facing the intelligent zombie while the others protected the children and fought their way toward the surface access ladder, the fate of the last survivors of Millbrook Haven hung in the balance between the forces of humanity and the evolving intelligence that threatened to consume what remained of their world. David Palmer's connection to the infected hive mind sent waves of agony through his elderly frame, but he gritted his teeth and focused his will against the alien intelligence trying to invade his consciousness, using his partial immunity as a weapon rather than a shield. "I can disrupt its control," David gasped to Marcus, his eyes rolling back as he fought a mental battle that no human had ever experienced before. "But I need you to keep it distracted while I break the connection between it and the others." Marcus stepped forward to face the intelligent zombie, knowing that he was probably walking to his death but determined to buy David the time he needed to save the remaining survivors. The creature that had once been human smiled with lips that were partially decomposed, revealing teeth that were stained with the blood of countless victims, but its eyes held a malevolent intelligence that spoke of plans far beyond simple hunger. "You cannot comprehend what we're becoming," the intelligent zombie said in a voice that echoed unnaturally in the subway tunnel. "Your species had its chance to evolve, but you chose stagnation over transformation." Behind Marcus, Riley was guiding the children and the other survivors toward the maintenance ladder, her rifle trained on the ranks of infected that surrounded them but held back by some invisible command from their leader. Annie Martinez clung to Michael Torres with tears streaming down her face, while Beth Carter whispered prayers under her breath as she helped Emma Williams support David Palmer through his psychic struggle. "Evolution doesn't require the destruction of conscience," Marcus replied, slowly drawing the knife from his belt since his ammunition was completely exhausted. "What you've become isn't superior, it's just another form of death." The intelligent zombie's laugh was like the sound of breaking glass as it gestured to its assembled army of infected, their decomposing forms standing in perfect formation despite their physical decay. "Death," it mocked. "We are beyond death now, we are legion, we are eternal, and soon we will be everything." But as the creature spoke, David Palmer's mental assault began to take effect, and several of the infected in the front ranks suddenly stopped moving in unison, their heads turning in confusion as if they were awakening from a long nightmare. "It's working!" David shouted through gritted teeth, blood streaming from his nose as the psychic battle intensified. "I'm breaking through their conditioning, but I can't hold it much longer." Marcus launched himself at the intelligent zombie with his knife, knowing that this was their only chance to destroy the creature before it could regain full control over its army, and the two combatants crashed into each other with a violence that echoed through the tunnel like thunder. The intelligent zombie was stronger than any human had a right to be, its infected physiology granting it unnatural power, but Marcus fought with the desperation of a man who knew that the future of humanity might depend on the next few minutes. As they grappled in the darkness, Riley managed to get the first group of survivors to the maintenance ladder, with Jake climbing up to force open the street-level access hatch while Beth and Emma helped the children begin their ascent to freedom. "Come on, come on!" Jake shouted from above as he broke through the rusted metal covering and felt fresh air rush into the tunnel for the first time in decades. The street-level access emerged in an alley behind an abandoned shopping center, and as the survivors climbed out one by one, they could hear the distant sound of helicopter rotors approaching from the east. Lisa immediately activated her emergency beacon, sending out the distress signal that would guide the rescue helicopters to their location, while the others formed a protective circle around the children who had finally escaped the underground nightmare. But down in the tunnel, Marcus was losing his fight against the intelligent zombie, the creature's unnatural strength overwhelming his human limitations, when David Palmer made the ultimate sacrifice that would be remembered by every survivor who lived to tell their story. "I can end this," David announced, his voice echoing with newfound power as he fully connected to the hive mind and began broadcasting his own will through the psychic network. "But it means I go with them." Before anyone could stop him, David Palmer channeled every ounce of his remaining life force into a psychic explosion that severed the connection between the intelligent zombie and its army, causing the creature to convulse in agony as its control network was shattered beyond repair. The infected throughout the tunnel began dropping to the ground as their artificial coordination disappeared, and the intelligent zombie itself let out a scream that was both human and inhuman before collapsing into final death. Marcus crawled away from the creature's body just as Riley returned to help him climb the maintenance ladder, both of them exhausted but alive as they emerged into the alley where the sound of approaching helicopters grew louder with each passing second. The rescue helicopters arrived as the sun rose over the devastated landscape, their crews finding 37 survivors huddled together in the alley behind the shopping center, including 7 children who would grow up to become the foundation of humanity's recovery efforts. As they were lifted away from the ruins of Millbrook Haven, Marcus looked down at the compound that had been their sanctuary and their battleground, knowing that Tommy Rodriguez, Robert Chen, and David Palmer had given their lives so that others might have a future. The pilot of the lead helicopter, Captain Sarah Martinez, briefed them on the situation as they flew toward a military evacuation center hundreds of miles away. "You're among the last survivors from this region," she explained, her voice professional but tinged with sadness. "The infection has been contained in most areas, but but it came at a terrible cost. We estimate that less than 10% of the population survived the initial outbreak. But as the helicopters carried them toward safety and an uncertain future, Emma Williams continued her research into David Palmer's immunity, knowing that his sacrifice had given them more than just freedom. It had given them hope that humanity could develop natural resistance to the infection and perhaps one day reclaim their world from the darkness that had consumed it.